Are you checking, Francisca?
I'm trying to check.
All right, it looks like we are live on Facebook now. And of course, I think that we should be able to start with our show today. All right.
Okay.
All right, thank you very much. And today I bring you the show again. It's Melanin Chit
Yeah,
Chat.
Jam.
And I'm standing in for Dr. Lynn Kumede, who is not able to be with us today. So please just bear in mind that we are in a show and we will be talking about a very sensitive topic. And let me just start with the show today. So good afternoon, everyone. Those that are joining us on Zoom platform as well as the Facebook platform. It's a Sunday. It's just about 2 minutes after 3 o'clock today. And this is the Melanin Chat Show. And I'm Dr. Nhlakanipho Kumede, standing in for Dr. Lynn Kumede. As usual, we start our show with an African proverb. And today's African proverb is, it takes a village to raise a child. And again, let me repeat the African proverb. It says, it takes a village to raise a child. And again, welcome to our chit-chatters and to our honorable guest for today, Francisca Fakazile Mazibuko, who will be introducing herself shortly. And I know that on the Zoom platform, we already have Dr. Memela, who's also joining us. And I just want to remind you that the 30th of May to the 6th of June is actually a National Child Protection Week in South Africa, which is an important fixture on the UNICEF calendar and has been commemorated since 1997, we are told. And in a week-long series of programs, campaigns, and events, awareness is raised on the need to protect children against abuse, exploitation, neglect, and all forms of violence. The campaign is led by the Department of Social Development in partnership with key government departments and civil society organizations rendering child protection services. Please take a moment to refer to the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa and to the Children's Act, Act number 38 of 2005, to broaden your knowledge on children's rights. Now we're going to start our show, but before we introduce our guest, or our guest introduces herself, I just want us to play just a little bit of a short video that I would like us to have a look at. So I'll share it on my screen, and then if you can see it, just say yes, and then we will take it from there. All right. All right. Thank you very much for joining us. I think we have Komoto and Zinhle again that are joining us on the Zoom platform. I know that I'm starting this on a very serious note, and it actually brings tears in my eyes when I actually look at these stories and hear some more of these stories actually coming up, and people sharing their stories of what had happened to them as children and what is actually currently happening to them as children. So let's just move ahead with our show. And again, let me introduce to you our guest for today. Welcome to the Millennium Chit Chat. Francisca, please introduce yourself and tell us more about your line of work.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's so good to be on the show. My name is Francisca Fakazile Mazibuko. I am a registered social worker. I have a little bit of experience in child welfare and employee assistance services. I am currently working though as a teaching assistant at the University of Pretoria. I teach first and second year students in practice, and I'm also a board member of Keep That Gold Shining, which is a non-profit organization that aims to unleash the youth's potential through the use of mentorships and tutoring programs across South Africa. Now, as a social worker, my line of work would usually entail then working with specific groups of clients, including children, the elderly, families in crisis, and communities in crisis. And generally, I would specialize then in either adult or social care. The clients that we work with may be vulnerable or in difficult situations. So then we need to be able to work under pressure and understand other people's viewpoints.
Wow, that's very interesting to me. It actually says that you do have a lot of experience in dealing with some of these situations, such as the one that we are actually dealing with today. And again, I would like to, on behalf of Dr. Lynn Gumede, who's the host for this show, welcome you on the show, and thank you very much for availing yourself to form part of this amazing conversation about National Child Protection Week. Now, we understand that we are at the end of the National Child Protection Week, but just tell us briefly, what is the purpose and the importance of this week?
I think, as you mentioned earlier, that it's something that the Department of Social Development introduced as a yearly commemoration to basically just remind our community members of the fact that children are vulnerable. You know, in South Africa, we live in a society with the constitution that has the highest regard for the rights and the equality and dignity of everyone. So protecting children from violence, exploitation, and abuse is not only a basic value, but it's also an obligation that's clearly set out in Article 28 of our Constitution. You know, so the basic aim of child protection is to ensure that children are safe, that they are protected, that they're taken care of. And we would take then a multidisciplinary approach into doing this. And obviously, despite the best efforts of South African government and civil society to protect children from child abuse, a lot of children are still exploited and they remain vulnerable. Hence, then the annual weekly celebration or commemoration of National Child Protection Week.
Wow. Yeah, that's quite really interesting. You know, as an adult, we always think that we are the ones that needs to protect children, but it's quite amazing to actually learn that we, the protectors, or supposedly people that needs to protect our kids, are the one that actually cause more harm to these children.
It is very sad, Saganiko, because most of the time, especially in Black communities, we usually do not look at children as civil servants of society. Basically, they are the people that we own in a way, that because I bore you, you're mine, you follow my rules, and we then end up neglecting their emotional and physical needs. We take problematic behavior as just that, problematic behavior, whereas we need to look deeper into these things and see why exactly these children are acting up. What is going on with the youth today? What are the issues that the youth is dealing with today? And we need to be more cognizant of the fact that children have basic human rights that we as adults need to be upholding, and making sure that they also understand their rights in society and that they are taken care of and protected at all times.
Yeah. So, you know, while preparing for this show, we've learned that there are 5 Ps in child protection. Can you tell us what these are and why they're important to us?
The 5 Ps, or otherwise known as the 5 key principles of the Children's Order, which was established in 1995, are prevention, paramountcy, partnership, protection, and parental responsibility. Now, I would assume that all of these are basically self-explanatory, but I will go into the more I guess the more that we won't really know much, which is paramountcy. And that really just refers to the needs of the child always coming first. Obviously, partnership within us partnering with community members and even civil organizations. The protection of children is very self-explanatory. We need to protect and uphold children's rights. And then the parental responsibility, which means that I, as a parent, need to ensure that my children are always safe and secure. First in the family, in the school, in the community. We should know that children can be fully protected so that they can survive, grow, learn, and develop to their fullest potential. Millions and millions of children all over the world are not fully protected because many of them will deal with violence, abuse, neglect, exploitation, exclusion, and or discrimination on a daily basis. And so knowing these 5 key principles would then help us to actually understand our role as civil servants to protecting and upholding the rights of children.
Wow. Do you think that perhaps maybe people are aware of these 5 Ps, or even if they cannot call them 5 Ps, but are they aware of these principles that we've just highlighted?
In my full opinion, I think we are somewhat aware. I don't think that any parent or even adult is not aware of the fact that children are vulnerable. But are we cognizant of them? I highly doubt it because obviously our lives get so busy. There's other things that we also deal with as adult people that sometimes really these are just things that are at the back of our heads that we don't really practice on a daily basis. Or even sometimes, I can probably say that people who are in more rural or vulnerable communities really have no idea of what the 5 basic principles are. It's like, Maudlile, udlile, and that's it. Like you've got clothes on your back, you've
Yeah.
eaten, everything else is fine. I've done my job as a parent. So we do need more education on these things, so that we can keep them really at the forefront of our thinking when dealing with children.
As you are talking about this, and something that comes into mind, I've always had this fear of parenting. And I always ask myself this question: am I going to be a good father? Am I going to treat my kids, the best way that they need to be treated? But I don't find that many people actually reflect, even before they have kids, in terms of the amount of responsibility that they have as parents in this regard.
I can definitely agree with that. I think that's one of the most issues I have with parenting right now, that most of the time parenting is glorified as, oh, I'm just a parent, I have kids, my kids are beautiful, but do we actually think of the responsibility that comes with parenting and how much you're actually taking care of another human life? Fully responsible for that human life, making sure that they are safe and protected. And in this world where everything is so dangerous, do we understand the extent that we actually need to actually take responsibility for these children that we've created on this earth? And so I think these such conversations I'm very grateful for that are available, because we need to be reminded that really creating babies or making babies is not just a fun thing that we do because you want a cute little human being out there, but it's also a thing that you actually need to understand that if I'm creating this human being, then I'm solely responsible for their well-being at all times.
Wow, thank you very much for that response. And again, welcome to Dr. Memela on the side, Khomotso and Zintle, who are joining us on the Zoom platform. Just to remind you that at any given point, if you would like to comment on this topic, you are more than welcome to do so. So let's just...
We need you to invite us, Dr. Kumede. We can't just jump in.
So anytime, if you want to come in, just come in. Come on, Dr. Memela, your voice on the issue?
Okay. First off, I'd like to start with giving you, the public a few statistics, because I actually went and I did some research this time.
Yeah.
So basically, the University of Cape Town looked at the whole population of South Africa, and they realized that out of the whole population, 35% is made up of children.
Sure.
Okay. And of that 35%, 91%, no, 40% have experienced neglect and abuse. Okay.
Sure.
Yes. And 60% of that 35% are children who are multidimensionally poor.
Sure.
So it's a huge percentage that we are talking about. We're not talking about just if 60% of these children are poor, I'm sure we know, because they receive the grants and everything, and almost everybody whose parents are unemployed receives the grants. So we can actually believe that the statistics are true. So this actually puts us in a bad manner as South Africans.
Yeah.
However, the inaugural African Youth Survey actually showed that they were actually looking at 16 countries out of Africa, and they were looking at the youth between 15 and 17. Other countries have more faith in our youth than our youth themselves. 91% of our youth is afraid of sexual harassment. 50% of our youth has no hope in the future of South Africa. And I found it very shocking.
It is very shocking, I must say.
Yes, and 50% of our children do not know about their rights. They don't know about the children's rights, the Bill of Rights, or anything like that, which basically means that even though we're having these weeks every year, it's still not getting to a lot of people. A lot of children are still not aware of their own rights and what they can expect as children. And some of them actually live under these conditions, which when we actually, when we talk about protection, we're talking about, their rights to feel safe. We're talking against human trafficking. We're talking against sexual harassment, physical abuse, neglect. Neglect is also part of, it's part of this. If your parents are not taking care of you, you are being abused, and harassment. So children are not aware that they have all of these rights, and they don't understand what we're talking about when we're talking about this National Protection Week. So we need more platforms to empower the children. Yes.
Definitely. I think that, you're spot on when you say that actually we need more platforms where we talk about these, because I think earlier on with Francisca, we spoke about whether or not are we aware, or are we conscious, or are we ignorant of our responsibilities as the adults and the responsibilities that we have towards children in this point. And I think that it brings me to the question, Francisca, that ask a question, Eti. I mean, why does every country need a child protection plan, and what are some of the key components of a child protection system?
That's actually a very, very good question. And I think when Ulungile touched a lot on the fact that we have such weeks every single year, yet our communities still have no idea what Child Protection Week is all about, what abuse, and I like that she touched on the basic forms of abuse as well, because those are some of the things that we'll touch on later on as well, to just speak about what are the forms of abuse and how do we recognize them in our communities. And I think having a child protection plan, we all know that first of all, children have a right to dignity. Basic human dignity, and their physical and psychological dignity. Like any other right, that right to protection of all forms of violence is an inherent one. That means that regardless of your race, your nationality, whatever, your gender, ethnicity, color, language, whatever, every child has that right to live a life that is free from harm. And therefore, a protection plan would be something that would be drawn up by the local authority, And it looks at basically how the child can be kept safe, and how things can be made better for the family and what support they'll need. Now, specifically in South Africa, we are guided by legislation, and I think there's about 5 forms of legislation that actually guide child protection, and that would be the Child Justice Act, that would be the Children's Act, the Child Care Amendment Act, the South African Constitution, and the Sexual Offences and Related Matters Act. We spoke about child protection systems. Those can be then identified as a certain formal or informal structure that functions and capacities that have been assembled to prevent and respond to violence, abuse, neglect, and exploitation of children. The primary components of a child protection system would then include laws and policies such as our different acts, human and financial resources such as us as an NGOs and other multidisciplinary professionals who work into protecting children. And also just governance, which would also fall under our policies and government structures and everything. Means of data collection, which Dr. Kumete touched on, Wuti, UCT collected statistics to see how many children do we actually have in South Africa and how many of them are being abused. We have such a thing as also system monitoring, which then would also monitor of the children who are in now the system, how many of them have actually gotten help, how many are still in need of help. We've got child protection and response services, which would then be our welfare structures, our social development department, our NGOs, and even our non-formal support from communities and families, all will make up then of a child protection system, which falls under the child protection plan that we have in place in our constitution.
Yeah, so it seems to me like South Africa as a country has actually put a lot of effort into regulating really the laws that are meant to protect our children in our country. And I think then what is left for us to do is to precisely to observe the law and to not mistreat children. But I mean, we use the word, I think in this show today, we will be using the word child maybe 100 times or 1,000 times if you were to go back to the actual clip and actually count. But who do you regard as a child, really? What is the definition according to the South African law?
A child would be anyone between the ages of 0 to 18 by definition of the law, who obviously has to be under the protection of a parent or a guardian. They are regarded as a minor. So until you turn 18, you are regarded as a minor, and you would need to be protected under the Child Care Act.
All right. So, I mean...
Dr. Kumete, I would actually go informally as to those who are actually intellectually disabled, because they are, even though their bodies and their years are, above 18, but mentally they are still less than 18, which basically means that they are still vulnerable and they still need to be protected. So even though it is not stated in the law, but they also do fall under the children.
That's quite an interesting point, to actually even think about that. I didn't think about it for once, but when I'm faced with a situation like that, I'm always assessing a person based on their intellectual capacity. And I can then grade them according to their years. And I say, no, but this person is unable to make the decisions that conform to what adults can actually do. Therefore, I put them as a child, and I would want somebody else to give authority or to give a consent on their behalf, even when they are 25 years of age. That's quite really interesting. And thank you for bringing that up, Francisca.
Yeah, I think it's actually a very important thing that Dr. Lungile mentioned, Uguti. Those people also need to be regarded, because if you can't make decisions on your own, you definitely would need someone who would be in a capacity to actually think in the best interest of your well-being. And it's quite interesting that we most often actually really put those people aside. And I think that's also an important thing that she brought up, that people with intellectual disabilities are usually also kept aside as a vulnerable group, and we tend to forget that they also need to be taken care of, and they also need to be put under that bracket to say these are the people that we really need to be thinking for and be considerate of their well-being as well.
Wow. So, I mean, you're talking about this child abuse thing and all of those type of things. Now that we know that they are prone and they are vulnerable and all of those type of things, but then the question would be, what are the types of child abuse that exist in our society or well defined in law? And if you can, just please elaborate further on these.
I think I'm going to first want to just define child abuse in its entirety so that we all have an understanding of what it is when we speak of child abuse or child maltreatment. And that would be then, it is like a form of ill treatment or neglect that would lead to physical, sexual, emotional injury or harm. And going deeper into it, I think earlier Dr. Lungil also mentioned the 4 types of child abuse. I'll just quickly recap them again, which would be neglect, physical abuse, sexual abuse, and emotional abuse. And although these forms can be found separately, they can all sometimes often occur together. And so to just go deeper into it, to just define all these 4 forms of abuse, I'd start with neglect, and that would be the persistent or significant neglect of a child, or even the failure to protect a child from exposure to any kind of danger, including maybe cold or starvation, or the persistent failure to just carry out important aspects of care, which would then result in the significant impairment of the child's health or development, which would then include non-organic failure to thrive in the environment that they're in. Physical abuse would be then any just physical injury to a child, whether it be deliberate or inflicted knowingly or even not prevented when actually recognized. And then sexual abuse would be then the sexual exploitation of a child or even just a young person or for an adult or another young person's sexual gratification, or even the involvement of children or younger people in sexual activities of any kind. And this also includes exposure to pornography, of which they do not understand, to which they are unable to even give consent, or that violate their normal family roles. Now, going on to emotional abuse, that would then be just the persistent of or significant rather emotional ill treatment or rejection that would result in adverse effects on the emotional, physical, and or behavioral development of a child. Usually these things can be seen in different ways, and we have a guideline, especially as social workers, that we usually share with the community to say we have physical indicators and we also have emotional or behavioral indicators that would actually give you an idea that this child is being abused in any of these ways. To go deeper into that, I would go maybe just to explain 1 or 2 physical and or behavioral indicators of child abuse in any other form. Starting with maybe physical abuse, for instance. A physical indicator there would be any unexplained bruises or burns, particularly if they are recurrent. You may find that the child comes to school, or you find a child in the community with human bite marks, with welts, or even bald spots on their head. Any unexplained lacerations as well, or fractures or abrasions that the child just cannot explain if you ask them what happened here, or even any just untreated injuries. That would be the physical factors that you can see, okay, this one is being physically abused. And most of them also, like I said in the beginning, that children act out when they are being abused. Therefore, their behaviors will then show that I actually have a problem at home. Now, a behavioral indicator of physical abuse would then be any self-destructive tendencies. Any child who just behaves in a self-destructive manner, who is what you would call disrespectful into the community, that may be a sign or an indicator that this person is actually being abused. Any other improbable excuses that will be given to explain the injuries we explained in the beginning, to say, but what happened here? And you'll find that they'll give really just explanations that you don't understand, like they're not telling you the full story of what happened to them. You may find that children who are chronic runaways, children who stay away from home or stay late from home, children who are afraid to go home after school, that's an indicator that something is wrong at home. They may be aggressive or even withdrawn. They may even be reluctant to physical contact. So if you just try and put your hand on the child's shoulder, you find that they flinch.
Yeah.
That's a sign that something is not okay. And even sometimes they may wear clothing that's just inappropriate to the weather. You may be wearing a long sleeve polo neck just to hide your body, to say there's something wrong here. Those are all just indicators we can see for specifically physical abuse. And then I think going on to neglect as well, the physical indicators there, if the child is constantly hungry, you may find that they have poor concentration at school and they just are constantly looking for food. If you give them food, they instantly are just like grabbing onto it. You can see that they're malnutritioned. A poor state of clothing and or personal hygiene. Children go to school with unkempt hair, with dirty uniform and school shoes, torn socks, torn shirts. That's neglect. No child should be exposed to such, because that will also lead to now bullying, which is another form of abuse that's slowly going up the rails in schools. Maybe any untreated medical problems. You can see that this child probably has had lice or sores on their bodies that has been just untreated for the longest of time. That would be an indicator that nobody is paying attention to this child. If the child is constantly tired, it means they're not getting enough sleep at home, and maybe they've got too many chores that they need to do. Maybe they come from a child-headed household where they need to take care of their siblings and therefore they are doing too much for their age. And then going on to behavioral as well, like we said again, if they're just constantly tired, they are sleeping at school, they don't have any energy, the lack of social relationships where the child just has no friends because maybe they can't have the time to play because they've got so many roles at home to play, because no one is taking care of the adult role in the household. You may find that they are compulsive stealers, or they beg, or they scavenge. That means that they're lacking something, and so they need to do anything in their power to make sure that their means are met. If they're frequently absent or late at school, there's a problem there, because maybe no one is able to wake them up, no one is able to tell them, okay, it's time to get up and go to school, or they had to prepare for all their siblings. If they've got low self-esteem, I mean, who would want to have like a good self-esteem if they're being neglected? No one is loving them, no one is telling them how special they are, no one is telling them how beautiful or smart they are. Now obviously that self-esteem is going down and down the rails. All you are getting is, go do your chores, go do this, I'm beating you up, I'm emotionally abusive to you. My self-esteem is going to go down the rails. Now, speaking of also emotional abuse, just some of the physical indicators there would be a sudden speech disorder. Maybe now the child is starting to stutter. You find that the child was bubbly before, but now they turn to shy away and withdraw. Now they can't speak up for themselves. Now they are soft-spoken. Some of them self-mutilate as well. So to get rid of that emotional pain, you would find a child who probably cuts herself or hurts herself in any other way, to just kind of feel anything but the emotional pain. That's a sign that something is going on there. Some children may wet or soil themselves. You mentioned earlier that, when children are wetting themselves, we tell them, I just stop wetting your bed, man. You're an adult, usukhulile, stop doing that. Whereas you're not understanding that maybe this child really just is emotionally disturbed, and maybe they have nightmares at night that really just frighten them. And of course, I'm going to wet my bed. Some of them have attention-seeking behavior. So any form of attention for me, even if it's bad, even if I get shouted at every single day, if I get that attention, that's enough for me, because no one is paying attention to me. So I'll act out in order for me to actually get that attention. And then also they'll have neurotic behavior. They'll thumb suck. They'll twist their hair or pull out their hair. That's something that can say that they're actually stressed out emotionally. They probably fear new situations. They fear change. They're also chronic runaways there. And they also just have inappropriate emotional responses to painful situations that would actually indicate that these people are probably then used to pain, that they are so probably numbed out, and no child should be numbed out to any type of pain. And then with sexual abuse as well, you'd find that if a child, you see that they are struggling with pain or soreness or bleeding in the genital area or the anal area or even in the throat, that's an indicator that something is not okay. If they've got torn, strained, or bloody underclothes, if they've got chronic ailments such as stomach pains or headaches, even probably young children would have frequent urinary or yeast infections. That's not okay for children to have that. They may be vulnerable to diseases such as STIs and STDs. Some of them even fall pregnant as a result of the sexual assault. And then you'll find that behaviorally, they may be chronically depressed or even suicidal. They may have inappropriate behavior, sexual behavior, so they may be seductive or precocious, or what we'd call just too big for their age. They may have sexually explicit language, and they may have low self-esteem as well, a lack of confidence. You find that they devalue themselves. Most of them would fear the dark or fear sleeping alone or have recurring nightmares. And then the most common one would be the outburst of anger and hysteria, because I don't know how to express the fact that I'm confused about what's happening to my body. I don't like what's happening to me, and so I'm going to react. You know, some of them may be overprotective towards siblings if they have siblings, because now they don't want what's happening to them to happen to their siblings. So rather it happen to me, but they touch my siblings, and then you'll see what's going to happen. So those things, we can all just see that these are the signs, and you can find that they interrelate as well. These behavioral and physical, they interact and intertwine, where if this child is experiencing more than one of this form of abuse, then you'll see them as a problem child. They turn into juvenile delinquencies, of which now we are putting them into the system instead of actually preventing these things from happening. I feel like we shouldn't even be getting to that point where a child needs to be called a juvenile delinquent. We need to be tapping these things at the core and seeing the signs as early as possible, trying to get them the help that they need to make sure that we don't get another generation of abused children.
Yeah. Well, that's a very deep explanation right there to try and really get us up to speed with the explanation of what child abuse is all about. But, you know, as you're explaining, and something just got into my mind, and I'm thinking to myself, is then the issue of children being beaten at school by teachers part of abuse, if, you know, the law itself actually stipulates that it's any form of harm that is actually that is meant to harm the children? Does that also qualify as part of you know, child abuse by any chance? I know that there is already a ruling about that matter, and not many children or teachers are very happy about it, particularly because of the issues of non-replacement of whatever that you're taking away. So you're taking away that form of disciplining children, and then you're replacing with what? What is your view on that?
Dr. Kumede?
Yes.
Dr. Kumede?
Yes.
Before we move on, I'd like to say a few things about the previous point.
Yes.
From my clinical experience, and this I've come across many times, and I've often made the mothers aware that this is a form of abuse, but that nobody actually, you know, takes note of. You find that children come to the hospital or the emergency room with children that have been burnt.
Yeah.
Now, to me, burns are a severe sign of neglect and abuse, because when you have a child, you know that you should not put something, you should not boil water in front of a child. You should not put a basin of boiling water in front of a child. And something so severe like taking somebody who's epileptic and asking them to make fried chips. And this person comes to me boiled by hot oil, you know, and you know, frequent car accidents where the mother is constantly letting the child cross the road by themselves. And these are the things that, you know, actually come to us, to the emergency room often. And we are afraid because, well, first of all, we work in a private environment where we can be sued, but you can see that this child is being neglected. and you speak to the mother and you tell the mother, you know what, I can actually report you for this behavior because you're not doing your child any good by doing this. And, you know, the excuses that come will be, it's the nanny, I've got a new nanny, this and that. Like I've had one child who actually, you know, has autism, and he's been in a car accident, he's been burnt, he's been through almost everything, and he's only 7 years old. And I looked at the mother, and she's got another baby already. I mean, if you can't take care of one child, if one child is a handful already, why have another baby that's going to take your attention from this child? Because we all know that when a child is autistic, they need 100% of your attention. And now if you are having another small baby who also needs 100% of your attention, how are you going to take care of this autistic child? And you know what happens, that the injuries come in, because now you expect a nanny to take care of your child, but a nanny cannot take care of an autistic child. They are not trained to take care of an autistic child. So, you know, there are some forms of abuse that we don't, when you know, in normal society, we don't consider them abuse, but are actually abuse because it is neglect and the child ends up in danger.
Yeah, definitely.
And yes, and when we're talking about having, you know, taking children to jail as, you know, juveniles or delinquents, you know, it just crossed my mind how many times I've come across adults from Boys Town and Girls Town. I'm not sure if you guys know about Boys and Girls Town, but yeah, it's in my area of work. What basically, they take all these children from abused families. They come from these backgrounds where they were neglected, they were abused, and then they you know, as they grow up, they become runaways, they become delinquent, and you know, they become aggressive, so much so that they need to be contained in an environment. So I just need people out there to be aware that we have something called Girls Town and Boys Town where they rehabilitate children. Instead of just letting your child go and run around, you know, and go to jail, speak to somebody, you know, speak to somebody, because there is help out there.
Well, that's a very valuable information, I think, for people out there to know. And I'm noting that we were joined on Zoom platform by Adi Malwane, and welcome to the show. It's Melanin Chit Chat. We're talking about the National Child Protection Week. So I think that, Dr. Memela, you're raising some really serious issues there. And in my mind, I'm thinking that there's a very thin line. I don't think that the definitions that we have actually, and the types of abuse that we highlight, I think the most important thing is to understand the concept of abuse. And if you can fit any scenario within the concept of abuse, then I think that you would be able to say, no, this child is being abused here. I'm also one of those culprits doctors that, you know, when I always, you know, receive a child with bends, I go deeper and I go beyond just looking at the wounds that the child present with, but I want to know what happened. Where was the mother? Who's taking care of that child? And what were the circumstances around that bends? And because, I mean, if you look at, you know, the numbers and the statistics of the children that are banned, it's just, you know, it's enormous when you look at that. And you can just see that there are a lot of challenges. One day, I'll invite you to my other platform where we'll talk about a child, or what we call control population, where we talk about whether or not in South Africa we can have a situation where you can only have 2 or 1 child, like the China actually have. But it's another discussion for some other time. And I think that also talks to us having to make those type of decisions that enable us to actually forge our way to make sure that our kids are actually safe. But you know, Francisca, you spoke about these types of abuse, and I was questioning about, you know, abuse in schools, whether it's the teachers to the kids. Does that form part of what we're talking about here?
I mean, obviously, with the law having made corporal punishment a form of abuse, I would definitely have to say that any sort of corporal punishment is physical abuse to the child. But also we need to look at, I know that as a Black continent, or in the African culture, we believe in sparing the rod. And some parents would say, I mean, spanking a child once or two times, just enough to get them in line, is not really so much of a problem. And I guess my personal view on that would be, if you're not harming the child in such a way that you're scaring them, I believe there's other ways that we can actually discipline children other than just spanking. I think before we even get to spanking, understand that children are also cognizant beings. They have mental capabilities. And one other way of raising a child is to raise them with great communication skills and comprehension skills. So sit your child down, talk to them about the rights and the wrongs, maybe have a little timeout session for them. Just make them approachable so that they know that if I do this wrong, mommy won't be very happy with me. Mom will be disappointed in me. Let's not just jump straight into ngakbet. It creates this form of fear for the child now to say, I can't even come to you if there's other forms of abuse that I'm experiencing, because, well, my mom just believes in hitting, or my dad believes guti mangikshayile, everything will be fine. But talk to your children, talk to them about, like, what is the difference between right and wrong. Discipline them in other ways. Teach them the basic communication skills, basic interaction skills, and just knowing that you also are responsible for your own self. I know growing up in primary school, when we were being taught about our rights, we were also taught about responsibilities. So even at home, remind your child that, listen here, that food is yours. You can eat whenever you feel hungry, but now don't mess up the kitchen. If you are finished with your plate, put it in the sink, wash it, put it back in the cupboard. If you can't reach it, you tell mom, I'm done. We put it in a safe place. You don't just run around and gallivant everywhere. That you know how to also protect yourself. If I'm going to the mall with you, I can't have a child that's going to be running and screaming everywhere that I have to chase around, because now that's also unsafe for you. If we explain these things to kids, that I'm actually doing these things to protect you, not to control you, then I think that we can get through to children by doing that. When we work with children, we do play therapy, and that's the easiest way that you can actually interact with the child, by just getting onto their level, learning the language, simplifying things for them so that they can understand exactly what we're talking about.
Well, thank you for that explanation. And again, I think that we should remind you that we are in a National Child Protection Week. This is almost at the end of this. But Francisca, you spoke about something that, it keeps on like ringing in my head. And you spoke about poverty and children exposed to poverty, and that also being a form of abuse in some sense. And I know that the statement that I'm going to make is going to be very controversial here, because now I'm going to be saying to government now, government does not need to sit down and watch our children live in poverty while they can actually do something about it. Maybe they should be the first people who needs to be prosecuted about this poverty in children. What do you say about that? And again, I want to hear your view, Dr. Mamela, as well, just to hear what you think about it. We know about these things, but what is the role of government in all of this?
No, I definitely agree with you there, because I feel like on paper, we have the best constitution. We've got everything set out. We've planned everything. Everything is written down. But when it comes to executing, and these are some of the problems that I think every government worker can agree with when it comes to policy execution, that there comes a problem there, because we're not really getting that support from the government itself to say, we've got this on paper, now let's execute it. Let's make sure that these children are actually protected from poverty. No child, in fact, no human being should be living in poverty. None at all. And I think that is the basic responsibility for our government to say, listen here, we've got all these rights for these children. We need to make sure that they're actually implemented well. And I think for me, the one thing I actually totally disagree on is working on the top-down approach, where we get policies from the top to say, okay, we do this, but we never ever look at the bottom. How are things actually going right there on the grassroots level? And we need to now change those things, and we need to change that approach to say, let's make it bottom up. Let's work from grassroots level. Let's actually ensure that every single community is taken care of, every single household is taken care of, and that people are utilizing. I mean, obviously we can't control households in terms of how they contribute or how they use the grant money or whatever, but we can still ensure that at least maybe they get food, like what we did for the COVID. I think that was very late for them to think, oh yeah, we need food parcels to be delivered to households. That's something we should be thinking about, because no child should be going to bed hungry when food is a basic need. It's a basic resource that can actually help people. And hence, I'm very much into community work where we go into these rural areas and we teach them how to be self-sufficient. We teach them that in order for you to have healthy food, go into your backyard, get yourself a little garden, plant your vegetables, and then the only thing that you would need to buy is probably your red meat. But have a few chickens if you must. Have a few goats if you can, just for you to be self-sufficient. Because I mean, obviously, we can't rely fully on the government. We've seen how they are, but teach them those skills to be self-sufficient and to be healthy at all times.
Okay.
Wow. Thank you for that. Dr.
Yes, Dr. Kumede. I'm gonna be controversial as well. A lot of people will say, don't give handouts. Rather, make sure that you empower people. And there will be people that are saying that rather than the government giving out food, they must give education to children. How do you concentrate at school when you're hungry? I'm going to give you a practical example. Okay, so a friend of mine told me that at this school, the children were, they were failing dismally. It's a very poor area. So I made it a point to make sure that these children have supper every day. I just, I made it a point that I just cook and I go out to them and I give them supper every day. And it was amazing because they stopped having sores on their bodies. Obviously, they had kwashiorkor. But what I found more amazing was the fact that they started doing well at school. They started passing at school. And in turn, what they were getting, they were telling other children about it, and more children were improving their marks. So obviously, you can't just give somebody education on an empty stomach. You need to do something. And the government is failing us because he can't do it by himself. But the structures that need to be making sure that children are not neglected, are being taken care of, are not doing it. The government should be making sure. I'm just going to be honest, because I feel against this greatly. If a grandmother is getting pension, and the pension is 1.8, right? And I as a priest come and say, Ogweshum, 10%, that's 180. I am giving those 180 to a man who already has enough, but I don't have enough. I have grandchildren at home. Why is the government allowing these things to carry on? Why are people giving their monies to churches instead of making sure that the community is being taken care of? Why is the government not doing anything about that? So the government can sit there and say, we're doing our best, but they're actually failing us, because there are things, there are laws that they can put, they can actually protect children, and they can actually make things, better. Legalizing abortion, for instance, it's not making things any better. I understand that when you don't want the baby and you say you can't take care of the baby, it's better to not have the baby than to bring the baby into this world. But, there are other things that they could have done, like controlling systems that would help them to take care of the children. So that's
a very interesting point.
I agree with you.
And I think that you're raising some issues with regards to some of the social issues that we somehow neglect, that have either a direct or an indirect impact on the well-being of the kids at home, particularly the issue that you were referring to. And thank you for raising that up. But I mean, I think, Francisca, as a social worker, you might be familiar with the term safeguarding. I mean, if you were to describe what safeguarding is, would you be in a position to describe that to us, and what is the role of social services in safeguarding?
So basically what safeguarding is that safeguarding, it involves keeping children safe from abuse and maltreatment. It ensures that they have the best outcomes and that they are provided with safe and effective care, and that they're also able to develop and grow happily and healthily without the risk of abuse or neglect. Now, on a daily basis, as a child protection social worker, I am now responsible for investigating any allegations of child abuse, endangerment, or neglect, or even any other circumstances of which the child or children may not be safe in the current living situation. It requires me as a social worker in child protection service to actually investigate and gather evidence to actually either substantiate these allegations or dismiss them. I would then often talk to just the referring party, any parents or guardians, and even the children involved in the case to just make a determination of the next course of actions. This would be done by conducting interviews or even collecting physical evidence. And it requires a daily interaction where I investigate and I write my reporting, my report writing. I document all my findings. I liaise with the court orders, the court, and I liaise with lawyers, police officers, community members, just to ensure that these allegations are in general true or not. And so I think it's going to be the basic principle of any child protective social worker to actually keep that in mind, to say, if I get a case, I need to step on it immediately. I need to find out whether this is happening or not, because we believe that prevention is better than cure. So rather just get it at the nip before it escalates into something worse. Obviously, I'm going to be very honest here and say we are overworked. There's a lot of caseloads that we have. There's a lot of child abuse cases that come up. So obviously, social workers sometimes cannot get to all of these cases immediately. But we try as best as we can to make sure that every single child is protected by means of safeguarding.
Yeah. No, thank you very much for that. Then, the next issue here is, maybe what we would like to know is whether, are you aware of any child protection training programs for educators in our South African schools in both public and private sector?
I wouldn't say I'm aware of any specific training institutions, but I know that most schools that we work with would have to have an established child protection manual, or even a policy that will be put in place for cases of child abuse, whether in or outside the school. I know that with the virtual environment that's growing, you can literally get a course with the click of a button, just to make sure that you are educated and most leveled up. And I know that the education sector does have a specific plan that says you need to be well versed in your United Nations Convention Rights of the Child, which is also an act. You need to also know exactly the Department of Education policy document on child protection and safeguarding of children, and you need to know your Children's Order of 1995 in order for you to implement and put this protection policy in place for most educators.
Well, so, the follow-up question to that would be, in South Africa, are you aware of any primary checks that are done then to assess precisely what you've just explained, the suitability of staff and volunteers who work with children, especially in the places of safety?
Yeah, of course, definitely. Like I said, South Africa is very, very well versed in protecting the children, and we've got so many acts and policies that we've put in place to make sure that children are protected. And we also have this thing called the Child Protection Register, or what we call Form 29 in the Children's Act. The purpose of that is to ensure that children are protected from abuse, in terms of obviously Section 126 of the Children's Act. All organizations that are working with or have access to children are required to assess and verify the suitability of their employees and potential employees. It's also the responsibility of parents to ensure that those that they entrust with the care of their children, such as childminders and early childhood development practitioners, including volunteers in childcare facilities, that these people are able and suitable to work with children. Obviously this ensures that the right people are chosen to work with children. If I go deeper just in the Children's Act, we have a section 111 that really mandates the Department of Social Development to keep and maintain a child protection register. It has two parts really, because part A is used to then record all reports of abuse or deliberate neglect of a child, whereas part B will then keep all the details of the persons that are declared unsuitable to work with children. This thing also starts from like being in the academic space. My second years, when they go out into community work, when they go out into work with community members, they need to also fill out that Form 29, because we need to make sure that we are sending out the right people to work with these children, to make sure that they're not in the register or even the Sex Offenders Act, that they're suitable to work with children. So this is something that really just needs to start from the bottom up, that wherever even if you're going to volunteer at a child's home, that children's home needs to ensure that that specific volunteer is not in the register at all, because then they can't be suitable to work with children.
Wow, thank you. Dr. Mamela, did you want to say something on that?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, always I do. Basically, I always say, I would like to see our government doing better. Let me not say our government is failing us this time. Let me be positive. I would like to see our government doing better in terms of providing a safe space for our children at schools. We were talking about what we can do in schools to ensure that there's a safe environment for our children.
Yeah.
Our government expects the overworked teachers to also be the counselors, the mothers for these children, which doesn't happen in independent schools. Independent schools have a school counselor. Why can't our schools have school counselors, where if a child has got a problem at home, she can go to the school counselor, and the school counselor can communicate with the local social worker or something, and then things can be done quicker. Because obviously the child hasn't done the homework, the teacher is not happy with the child, that very same child cannot come to the teacher and say, I have a problem at home like this and this and this, because now the teacher is not approachable. However, if the teacher can see that this child has got a problem, then the teacher can send the child to the school counselor, who in turn will have more time, hopefully, because our schools have a huge number of children. They can even afford 2 school counselors. I mean, we have a lot of youth that is unemployed. So our governments cannot say that they don't have counselors. They must train people to do this, because we have potential, we have people, we have the capacity. And the other thing is, when I was listening to, about the passion that people should have, it's unfortunate that people take certain jobs because they can't get any other job, because you find people that are doing emotional work but show no emotion. For instance, you can't be a social worker and I come to you and I say, this child is being abused. I am bringing this child to you. I took this child from an abusive home. Here is the child. I am showing you all the physical signs, and you just have no passion. And you have to fight as a doctor. You have to fight with the social worker. You have to call somebody and somebody and somebody before something is done. This cannot go on. So people should actually make sure that when they choose certain jobs, even if they don't have, they're looking for any job, they don't choose jobs where it's people's lives that are at stake. Because in this case, it's the child's life that is at stake. If I'm bringing to you a sexually abused child and you do nothing about it, that is actually criminal. It's not. It's not something that can just be accepted. So I would like to urge South Africans to put this out there to the government, that we need counselors at school. because I understand that right now they don't see the need for them because maybe they haven't been exposed and to what they do and they haven't been sensitized to it, but it's actually something that the public should demand from our governments. We can't just, yes, no, Korea.
Yeah,
No, and
no, you got
I
you.
love the fact that you brought that up. I'm so passionate about this. And speaking of that, we've been trying to sign petitions as social workers to say get more social workers at school. Like you speaking of unemployed youth, most of these unemployed youth are social workers, trained professionals who actually can work. We've been trying to liaise with the Department of Education, I think, for 2 years now to say hire social workers. You need social workers at schools. I always say that we at least need one psychologist and maybe two social workers in each and every school. It cannot be that private schools or independent schools can afford such, and yet the biggest schools that are public schools don't have this, when most of the children that actually attend these schools come from impoverished communities. We need more social workers to be engaging with students, because like what Dr. Kumete said, a child can come to school not having done their homework. The first priority a teacher has is to actually say, why is my homework not done? They won't look at maybe you came late because there was something that was happening back at home. Maybe you couldn't do your homework because you were being abused last night by your father, your father. Now, what do I need to do? I need to stop teaching and start counseling. Is it that not overworking me? And I'm still being paid only as a teacher, and I still also have to be a counselor when I can actually liaise. The one thing that we pride ourselves at as social is that we are working in a multidisciplinary team. That means that we work with doctors, psychologists, and educators to ensure that children's well-beings are always protected. So this is something that's really a passion of mine, and I'm hoping that, as you said, Dr. Kumar, South Africa can actually stand up and say, this is what we need to happen in society, that as a multidisciplinary team, we need to stand together and say, we need more social workers to work in schools. We need more social workers to be even in corporate situations where people really are dealing with emotional situations. And I cannot work if I'm not okay. Because as a social worker at school, I'm not only going to be taking care of the kids, but the teachers as well. They are also human. They also need to be taken care of emotionally and psychologically. So we need such things to be talked about every single time.
Yeah, thank you so much. You guys are actually putting me in trouble here, because now I'll be forced to put this conversation out to as many platforms as possible, and where actually people who make law actually need to hear about some of these things and actually take them very serious. And I think that's the purpose of these conversations, is to actually spark that interest, especially for government, to actually stand up and start actually feeling what the general population is actually feeling, and to do something about it, most importantly, because these things are not foreign. They are embedded within our constitution, and for us it's just to abide by the constitution and do what is right. I'm also very conscious of time. It's just 7 minutes after 4, and I just don't want us to leave anything out of this. And maybe just to move in just a little bit quicker on this. I mean, we've been talking about protection and being the responsibility of the parents, or rather the guardians, to do that. But what are the basic principles we need to teach our children about self-protection, Francisca?
First, I'd just like to highlight exactly why it is important for us to actually safeguard and protect our children. Because one, it really reduces the likelihood of children entering into unsafe situation. It demonstrates exactly how to respond to these unsafe situations, and also it increases a child's self-confidence. In doing so, it increases their resiliency as well. It also obviously increases the child's knowledge of their personal rights, to say, no, I have a right to feel safe around people. It also increases the likelihood of the child that will speak out if they feel unsafe to someone they trust. And also it can interrupt or even prevent child grooming. So now, as parents, we need to be able to teach our children these 5 basic principles that you're talking about. And just to go over them quickly, are obviously to trust their feelings and distinguish between yes and no. They need to be able to say no to adults if they feel unsafe and unsure. They need to own their own bodies. We need to teach these children that your body is your own. We need to also teach them that there's nothing that is so yucky or disgusting that you can't tell somebody about it.
Yeah.
They need to also know that if they feel unsafe or are unsure, that they need to run and tell someone that they actually can trust all the time. And to sum up all these things into just three basic rules that I always tell my kids when I teach them is that you need to be able to let children know, especially as a youth mentor, tell them that you have a right to feel safe with people. It's okay to say no, and that nothing is disgusting that you can not talk about it to anyone. As a parent, you need to talk to your kids regularly. Like I say, you need to be able to actually teach your children how to effectively express themselves, encourage them to feel comfortable into telling you anything. Children should not fear you. You also need to be aware, learn about the people that your children are spending time with. Take notice if someone or one of your children shows that there's something not okay with them. Take time to talk to your children and find out why they're actually acting like this. You need to be able to empower your children, because one thing that we know is that knowledge is power. Teach children about their bodies. I'm very much against, especially this in the Black community, I'm against this thing of not being specific about our body parts, because it becomes a problem when a child comes to me and they've been sexually abused and they cannot even describe or explain their experiences because they feel the words are too vulgar. We
Yeah.
need to be clear on talking to these kids about their bodies and knowing that which parts are private, how safe it is to actually be touched, and they need to know that this is a safe touch, this is an unsafe touch. If I'm going to the doctor and the doctor is examining you somewhere in your private, that's a safe touch if I am around you. If I
Yeah.
am here to monitor and actually engage. If someone else is touching you there, that's inappropriate. You teach them their rights. You have to notice them. Pay attention to your children. Notice any changes in behavior. Practice safety skills with your children. And now moving into the virtual world, we need to be cognizant of the fact that children are actually interacting with people they've never met before.
Correct.
Cyber safety is important. We need to be able to ensure that our children are safe even in the cyberspace. Children are going online a lot now. They are learning online, and they're creating discussion groups or whatever online. They may meet predators out there who's, I'm going to help you with your maths project if you just, give me something in exchange. Know who your children are talking to. Let us educate, especially as adults who are not inclined technologically, to teach us ourselves what are these children getting into when they're logging onto Facebook? What is this Facebook? What is this Twitter that you are talking about? Know where your children are engaging at all times.
Yeah, but thank you very much for that explanation. I was just reading a comment from Dr. Lynn Gumeda on Facebook, and she says that the need for social workers and counselors in the public schools, it's actually a topic on its own. So we'll take it up for that, to say that in the next shows, she needs to actually call you guys back and to actually discuss just that, the needs for these social workers and counselors in public school. But we have our clinical psychologist here, Uzama Dada, who actually wants to say something.
Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
I apologize for joining the conversation so late. I had other commitments. But as Ngena, Dr. Gumede is asking about protection, Uguti, and Ufaga has answered it so well. And I'd just like to add and emphasize on Indaba of consent and body autonomy. I think those are the two things that, as a Black community, we sometimes fail our children because of that. I remember last year I was telling my nephews, because now they're of teenage years, I was telling them that the only thing between you and a prison cell when it comes to sex is consent. Because I needed them to understand that as they go out there, as they become adult men, anything that is not consensual is not okay. And like Kufaga was saying, the injustice that we do is that we don't impart sort of knowledge to our children when it comes to body autonomy, owning their bodies, understanding how their bodies work, understanding what something as simple as what the different parts of the body are. You work in areas like, remember last year I worked in Tutuzela. You work in Tutuzela and you encounter a lot of children, and you find that vocabulary fails them when they have to describe their incidences and they have to describe their traumas, because we haven't equipped them enough with liberating vocabulary to describe their traumas, to describe their bodies and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's a very interesting input right there, Zama. And I think, this discussion, as much as, we have like 1.5 hours to discuss many things, but I think that, we actually need the whole year to actually talk about this and to drill it in people's heads for them to be actually sensitized about some of these things. And I think that if we can create these platforms where we speak about some of these issues, the more we speak about them, the more people are aware of them. And the more we put them on these social media platforms, instead of putting nonsensical information in the social media and things that do not make sense, these are type of the things that we actually need to share with the public and actually engage them so that they can be part of the conversation themselves. But I think, just so that we can just be on time, I just want to know, I think anybody can actually answer this, but Francisca, what steps do I take as an ordinary citizen if I find that a child is clearly in danger at the place or where or she lives?
Okay, here we spoke about safeguarding earlier. Like I said, it's something that we as social workers do, but honestly, any citizen can go through it. Now, what we often do when we do community work or outreach programs is we would teach the community about the 4 R's. That would help you to actually take part in protecting children. Firstly, the first R is you must recognize the signs of abuse. We've spoken about them, and we obviously now know how to recognize when a child is being abused, right? This may be physical, emotional, even sexual or neglect, right? The next thing now, record it. You need to ask yourself, why did this happen? When did it happen? What actually happened? If it was something that was said, who said it? What was actually going on in that situation, and what was happening at the time? Who was around to see or experience that? And why was it happening at that time? Now you need to ask yourself, after recording all of that, do I have to share this information? Does it have to be done immediately?
Yeah.
You may only know this by understanding, obviously, the individual policies and procedures that I've spoken about. That would be the impact, knowing children's rights and so forth. You need to now see whether this thing is a determining factor for you to report it. And that's going to be the third R. Now you need to report it after recording it to say, okay, this I've actually noted as a form of abuse in my head, in my notepad or wherever. I need to now report it. And now that once you've reported it, the final step is obviously you need to now refer that. All right, so that's where you ring the police. That's where you ring your local authority, and don't delay. Obviously, if it's not urgent and you need more information, then make the referral when you need to, and make it in a timely manner so that you actually have all the details in place when you go to your local social work department or your local police department to make sure that they are able to take the appropriate steps as they see fit. I know that one other thing is I can give out numbers that you can actually reach out. The social development has a pilot 24-hour call center that they've just dedicated to provide support and counseling to victims of gender-based violence, even child abuse. It's a toll-free number that anybody can call. They can speak to a social worker for assistance in counseling. We can also have a request to get a social worker come in from the command center, and we can contact them by actually dialing a USSD number that is also free from any cell phone. We've got obviously a Childline South Africa where children can report any type form of abuse. We also have child welfare. Those are the centers that we can contact to make sure that we report these behaviors to people that are appropriate.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. I think later on, we need to then give our viewers and our listeners those type of details so that they can actually have them. I actually do have a slide where I can actually show, and I did show it a little bit earlier when we started the show, so that they can get a brief on what numbers they can actually contact in cases where they need to report such events. Now, when a child has been placed in an alternative care, what does this mean?
Alternative care means anything from child foster care, a child youth care center, or even a temporary safe care placement. But we need to now realize that that is usually our last resort. I know that when people think social workers, they think, oh, you people just take babies away from their families. Obviously, there's thorough investigation that is done for a child to be placed in alternative care, because we can't just keep a child in alternative care for longer than 6 months if we have not done the proper investigation to ensure that this child actually needs to be placed in alternative care. We would need to have a court order put in place to ensure that we know that the court knows as well that this child is being put in alternative care because of such and such reasons. Also, if they're placed in alternative care, then we need to understand that that child needs permission to be able to then either leave the center or visit any family members or be visited. There needs to be permission there. And without permission, obviously, the child will be then caught by a police officer or social worker and then placed back into that. You know, for me to actually place a child in alternative care, I would obviously need to go to my head of department to get an order created to say, okay, this child has been found in need of alternative care. And then that decision can then be made after talking to the child and his or her parent or the caregiver. Obviously, the provisional head may then transfer the child. If the child was taken without permission from the parents, then we'd have to transfer the child into another alternative care. But obviously, then there are certain instructions that will give the family to say, okay, now we're moving the child into this. Everything needs to be done with communication of the parent or the guardians. We don't do anything just out of our own heads. There's thorough communication, because we understand that obviously, like we started the show, that it takes a village to raise a child. I am not going to take decisions on my own regard without consulting the guardian or even the social worker, you know. And it's not going to be a forever thing. Sometimes we really do work with a placement plan or a care plan to ensure that we actually get these children back into their communities. We actually do not like keeping children in alternative care because we feel it actually deprives them of experiencing the fullness and richness of their culture, traditions, and even this family life. And so while the child is in alternative care, we try to make any other plans to make sure that we actually reunify this child with the social worker. So I would need to be working very closely to check up on the child to see if I can place them back, if I can place them onto foster care. And when we look at foster care and adoption, we usually start within the immediate family members before we move out onto the public to see who can take the child. We try to keep the child within the environment that they're used to as much as possible. Obviously, the best interest of the child here are definitely important. And obviously, depending on what I, as a social worker, can recommend, the child may stay in alternative care until they are 18, or they may be discharged if they get adopted or into foster care, or even reunified with their family members.
Wow. So, I mean, we've spoken about all of these things, and I think that we've actually given a very clear understanding of what National Child Protection Week is and what it entails, what it means to actually an abuse to children, what it entails, and what are the 5 Ps that we've spoken about, and what is safeguarding, you know, what is an alternative place of living for children, and what steps do you need to follow. And I'm just thinking to my head as well to say that, I mean, one of the biggest issues and the syndicates of this country that unfortunately we see is actually the issue of child trafficking as well, where children are taken without the will of their parents and themselves away from the country of origin, and they are faced with quite big challenges out there where they are actually taken. These also include issues like, you know, child marriages that we see, children under the age of 18 being actually, you know, they get married with adults. And you can just imagine, you know, what exactly we want to achieve as a society about all of these things. Now, the question is, what is then our responsibility and our role towards the safety of children in this country now as law-abiding citizens? Do we have any responsibilities and roles at all?
Oh, definitely. We've got a huge responsibility, like I mentioned earlier, a huge responsibility towards protecting our children. I think the first thing that I can think of is definitely be an advocate. Raise the issue as much as you can. Call, write your candidates, any elected officials, educate them about the issues that are happening in your community and the need for child abuse prevention, intervention, or even treatment programs, you need to contact and have communication and relationship with your local school district and your any faith community or organization to encourage them to sponsor any classes and support programs for new parents. You need to reach out to kids and parents in your community as a community member. Anything that you can do to support kids and parents in your family or extended community will help to reduce the likelihood of child abuse and neglect. You need to be a good neighbor. You know, it takes a village. Ubuntu, you know, we are Black people, and we know ukuthi ingane ayikhuliswa just by only the one parent. We have aunts, uncles, neighbors. Offer to babysit. Donate your children's used clothing, furniture, toys that are used by another family. Be kind and supportive, particularly to new parents and children. Keep in mind the risk factors. That is, child abuse can occur in all segments of our society, you know, but the risk factors are obviously greater in families where parents either abuse alcohol or drugs, are isolated from their families or communities, or even have difficulty controlling their anger or stress. You need to be aware of that. You know, some family households may appear uninterested in the care and nourishment of their children and their safety. You know, sometimes children may have serious economic, housing, or even personal problems. And again, recognize the warning signs. They're there. You know, there are so many warning signs that we spoke about earlier that actually negate to children being abused or neglected. You know, nervousness around adults, aggression towards other children, the inability to stay awake or even concentrate for extended periods of time, and then also just sudden changes in like personality or activities, acting out sexually, you know, and even showing interest in sex that's just not appropriate for the child's age. The bruises that we spoke about, the injuries, the low self-esteem, the poor hygiene, you know, we need to report such things, you know, and if you obviously suspect abuse or neglect that is occurring, report it and keep reporting it until something is done. You need to call Child Protective Services or your local police department. Ensure that whatever that needs to be done to actually protect this child is done.
We have a huge responsibility when it comes to our responsibility to children in this country. The time now is just about 4:30. So we are coming to the close of our show. But before we close, I think we've got few people that are actually on our Zoom platform. So I'd like to hear from them if they are able to actually share their views about what has just happened before I can give Francisca and Dr. Memela the parting words. I think we've got Zintle Zama over there in case one of you want to say something before we close. Well, if they're not close by, I think that we can then move to Dr. Memela to give us, just a recap of what we've actually discussed, and there's some parting words from you.
Okay, I just want to bring to the attention of the public the term early sexualization. There is no such as a child slut. I'm sorry to use the word. Okay, when a child, like Francisca said, exhibits sexual behavior that is not appropriate of their age, you have to understand that there is a reason for that. Most of the time, our community turns against this child in such a way that even if the child tries to report something that's been done to them, the child becomes the victim. So our society needs to understand that when a child is overly interested in sex at a young age, it means that something is wrong and that something needs to be taken care of. There are just a few things that we as parents need to do to make sure that we protect our children. Number one, when our child speaks to us, no matter how traumatizing the child is telling you, whatever the child is telling you is, you need to be calm. Do not overreact. Do not scream. Do not shout. Do not make a decision at that point, because remember, things that we say out of anger are things that we often regret later. Number 2, we must be careful of the things that we say in front of our children. We must be careful of the language that we use in front of our children. You know, we must be careful of how we discipline our children. You know, calling your child names. You know, when your child has done something wrong and you start calling the child names, that child actually grows up to believe the names that you're calling the child. So you must learn to name the behavior and not the child. By that, I mean, lento yenzile iwuganga, hayi ukuthi uyisikhohlakali wena. Those are two different things. If I call my child isikhohlakali, or saying what you did was naughty, those are two different things. Okay, so we must be very, very aware of how we speak to our children.
Wow.
We must always make our children aware that their safety comes first. Don't assume that your child knows. Don't assume that your child knows that they can come to you with whatever problem they have. Your child looks at you. The child is looking at the struggles that you're going through. Your child doesn't want to add to your stress. She doesn't want to worry you. Sometimes she's scared of how you are going to, to react. So please make sure that you tell your child you are always there for them, you are open, and their safety is your priority.
Wow.
Don't put your relationships ahead of your children. It is often the people that we trust that end up molesting our children.
Correct.
It is the people that we leave our children with because I am in a relationship with you, so I believe I can leave you with my girl child who is a teenager. And remember, the child will not come to you because she doesn't want to hurt you. She doesn't want to embarrass you, and she will live with this for the rest of her life. I have seen this. And then you must know what your children are doing at all times. Your children will tell you, Mom, you're invading my privacy, this and this and that. Remember, you are the parents and you make the rules. So your authority needs to be, your child can't tell you what to do. If your child is on Instagram, you must be able to go to the Instagram at any time. If your child has a phone, you must be able to have access to that phone at any time. Regardless of your child telling you about privacy and everything, your child must understand who's the boss. And that in itself, having that figure of authority also gives them a sense of safety. So yeah, I guess everything else has been said. You must teach your kids about their rights and about boundaries. Boundaries are very important. The children must know about boundaries. They must know when to say no, and they must know it's okay to say no, like Francisca said. And they must know that there is something that is so disgusting that they can't tell. I like those 3 points that Francisca made because they are so important. So yeah, that's all I can say in parting on this subject.
All right.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for joining us. And as always, I take you guys as our resident partners in this. And thank you for always, coming in and joining in the conversation. And I'm just reading a comment from Uzinhle on the other side. She says that I must say that all the information I received today is life-changing and a huge challenge. I will definitely introduce this topic to my family so that we make it a norm to discuss such issues. So already there, somebody was listening and is actually taking a stand to say that this is going to be discussed at a family. And I've noted multiple engagements and people commenting on the Facebook platform to say that what a great interview and a conversation around this important issue. So without the waste of time, I think I'll give it to Francisca. Your parting words, please.
Thank you so much. I think firstly for me, it's that we we really need more coordinated action by every single person, every community member, all actors, to create circles of care for our children. You know, families need to be supported to protect their children and use parenting skills that avoid violence. You know, health workers, teachers, and other professionals also need to be able to identify and refer families to children to support services. You know, we all need to really commit to changing the social norms that underpin violence, such as gender norms that promote violent forms of masculinity and the stigma associated with reporting family violence. I think religious organizations and community leaders, artists, and even men and young boys particularly play an important role here in providing positive role models and speaking out against, you know, violence. And I'm going to then put a challenge as well to my fellow colleagues, police, social workers, and judiciaries. They need to ensure that when children or families report violence, that it is effectively taken up to keep them safe, you know, and that the services are available to support their recovery. And, you know, I think just to close it off, this year's theme was obviously let us protect our children during COVID-19 and beyond. This is something that really needs to just keep going, because with the plight of COVID, so many cases were brought up of child abuse. We need more conversations like this. We need more interaction on this. We need more education on this. We need more people like Uzindli who are going to take up and make a stand and say, in my family, these issues will be discussed. In my family, such things will happen in such a way that children are protected. We all have a role to play in child protection, and we must all play a role in it and take part and take charge.
Thank you so much for actually availing yourself for this interview. And I hope that our listeners back at home actually received quite a very, very detailed information from all the people that have formed part of this. And thank you, Francisca, for such an amazing, description of what the topic on child protection. And I could tell that you actually have a deep knowledge of the topic that you are talking about. But well, of course, and thank you to Dr. Memela as well. Thank you to everybody that has formed part of this. So we've come to actually the end of our show for today. And again, I am Dr. Nhlakanipo Gumede. I'm actually standing in for my wife, Dr. Lynn Gumede, who asked me to be the host for today. And I think that for the coming next week, she will be coming back to be Melanin Chit Chat. But before we depart, I would like to give you some information that I think is important. We spoke about, Francisca spoke about the numbers that you can call, and it is important for us to actually highlight that there is a childline South Africa that you can call. It's 0800 055 555, and I repeat, it's 0800 055 555. And the Child Welfare South Africa number is 086 14 24453 or 01145241110. You can also find them on the email on info@childwelfaresa.org.za. And again, please remember that we started our show with an African proverb. And again, I would like to repeat it to you. It takes a village to raise a child. So for me, it's good afternoon, and thank you for joining us, and bye-bye.